When I first tried Against the Storm a couple years ago, I was impressed with the core gameplay, but I questioned how much replayability actually existed. When I came back to this game earlier this year, I fell in love with that gameplay even more, and now I can safely say that Against the Storm is one of my favorite roguelites. So let's get into it. Against the Storm is a real-time strategy city builder roguelite. The gameplay is split into two parts: the actual missions or runs themselves, which I'll talk about first, and a 4X style overworld with various progression systems and unlocks that I'll talk about later on. At the start of each run, you're dropped into a wilderness area with some resources, some workers, and some of your core buildings. The core gameplay involves building up a settlement, collecting more resources, exploring the small area around you, and completing various challenges in order to win before your time runs out. If you've played city builders or RTS games before, this core gameplay loop will feel very familiar and easy to pick up. At the start of each run, you only have a handful of core buildings unlocked that you can build, like the woodcutting hut that allows you to chop trees, and basic houses that give your workers some shelter. These starting buildings allow you to get started, collect resources, refine some basics, but they don't allow you to do that much more. Resource management in Against the Storm is broken up into several different categories or types of resources. Generally speaking, you'll collect raw resources, process them into higher tier resources, and then process them even more sometimes to create luxury goods or things to trade. Take the example of wood. In its raw form, you can use it for keeping the vital hearth fire lit and building basic buildings. Wood can also be converted into coal that burns longer at the fire, or turned into planks that allow you to build higher tier buildings. Excess planes can also be converted into packs of building material, which can be used to complete trade routes, challenges, or just sold to a traveling merchant. It's a deep and complex web of resource management, refinement, and processing. As I'll talk about at a couple points later on, this game really rewards knowledge and in-depth management, but by no means is it required for you to get extremely into the weeds, do a lot of micromanagement in order to actually enjoy the game. Within each run, you're balancing two different meters: your reputation meter, which if you fill that up, you win the game, and the Queen's impatience meter, which if that fills up, you lose your game. As you do good things, you can gain reputation points. If you do bad things, lose villagers, don't complete challenges in time, the Queen's impatience meter can fill up instead. One of the main ways you gain reputation is by completing various challenges or tasks. As each run goes on, you'll unlock new challenges to complete. Most often, challenges involve collecting a certain amount of a certain resource. For example, send 40 wood and 10 bricks to the capital and be rewarded with 1 reputation point and 25 berries. Challenges can also involve every single game mechanic you can imagine, like completing a certain number of trade routes, exploring a certain number of forest glades, things like that. As you gain reputation, you unlock new building blueprints that allow you to place new buildings. This, in turn, allows you to refine high-level resources like making wine or packs of luxury goods. Alternatively, some buildings also allow you to refine the resources you already can do just more efficiently, like the sawmill, which allows you to make planks for less wood than the starter building. And here's where some of the roguelite mechanics start to come in. You only get a limited choice of what buildings to unlock at a time. And your choice here is incredibly important and helps make the game feel different run to run. Do I try to improve my food production, improve my resource refinement, or do I want to unlock the ability to make luxury resources to improve the well-being and resolve of my villagers? In addition to this randomized building unlocks, you also get randomized cornerstones each year that give you some buffs, like faster woodcutting or faster mushroom collection, things like that. Similar to those different building blueprints you have, these different cornerstones run to run help make things feel fresh and give you some strategy in regards to what choices you want to make and what you want to double down on. Do I want to get all these cornerstones that focus on mushroom farming, really double down on that? Or do I want to balance out some woodcutting, some mining, some trading cornerstones, kind of balance out and try to win that way? In addition to that resource management, you also indirectly control your villagers. At the core level, you assign them to different buildings or events as workers. There are 5 different races of villagers in the game, but on each given run, you only have 3 of them. Each of these different species or races have their own perks, their own buildings they like to work in, their own food they want to be fed, their own luxury requirements, things like that. The beavers, for example, are great at woodcutting and wood processing, while humans are great at growing hops and making beer. These different races you get allow for added depth and management that comes from trying to assign workers to the right jobs, try to meet the needs of those villagers that you have, trying to recruit more villagers of certain races in order to fill some niche that you have, like recruiting more beavers early on to improve that early game woodcutting. Unlike some other RTS style games, you don't manually move your workers, and there's also no combat that will require you to do that. However, there are still some dangerous events in the game. As you start each run, you're placed in a wooded area surrounded by hidden glades. Expanding into these glades is necessary in order to find new resources to gather, and larger glades also have random events. Generally speaking, these events require some resource, some workers, and will give you some reward in return. That can range from simple resources, or a new building, or it can be reputation points that get you ever closer to that run-winning goal. In larger glades, there can also be dangerous events that'll have some negative effect if you don't address them in time, like killing villagers, and they often also have a second negative effect you get while working on them. I really like these glade events and that exploration mechanic. There's a great tension between needing to explore to get those rewards and resources, and the potential to be really screwed over if you don't address dangerous glade events in time. Additionally, you eventually kind of have to open up glade events in order to keep chopping wood, which you need to keep doing in order to fuel your settlement. That tension between exploration, resource management, completing events, just chopping more wood, all come together to create fun tension in gameplay. And on that note, let's talk about the great level of control and optimization this game allows you to do. Starting with the example of woodcutting and glades, you can very tightly control which trees you want to cut. You can make them cut certain trees by highlighting them, and you can modify settings in the woodcutting huts themselves, making them avoid glades at all costs, for example. That same level of nitty-gritty control applies to resource management as well. The most important ones are probably recipe ingredient management and consumption control. Basically, for every recipe in the game, you can use multiple ingredients in order to make something. And this is really great because it prevents you from being locked out of making certain things if you don't have one specific resource. There's always multiple paths to each end. For example, bricks can be made by clay or stone. By default, only clay is used to make bricks, and usually only want to use clay to make bricks anyways, because stone is more valuable for other purposes. But if you don't have clay for whatever reason, you can use stone instead by modifying that recipe. While each building can make multiple things, you can also prioritize specific recipes within each building, making certain buildings focus on making planks, for example, or outlawing certain buildings from making planks altogether. These different levels of control give Against the Storm that enjoyable depth and optimization that I really love in city builders. I've had so much fun picking my buildings to meet certain needs, complete challenges, or just build up a supply of resources in order to trade them and win the game that way. There really are so many different systems in the game, but you absolutely don't need to deeply engage with all of them in order to have fun and be successful. For example, one system that I haven't talked about is managing corruption and rainwater, and that doesn't even exist at lower levels. There's no corruption to manage. And I haven't mentioned a lot of game systems like hostility and those randomized modifiers that come along with it. I think more casual city builder RTS fans like myself can have a good time with this game without getting that in depth. But I do think more hardcore optimizers will have an especially great time with this game because it has a pretty high skill ceiling. To help with managing all these complicated systems, this game has great UI and information sources in-game. You can easily tell which raw resources will be available on that run. You can search recipes to see what buildings you have unlocked that can make that thing, or it'll tell you what buildings you might want to unlock in the future in order to make that down the road. You can easily manage your villager assignments, and the game just feels polished and comprehensive in that regard. It feels like a finished product already. Also, another mechanic that's worth noting is that you can control the game speed. There are 4 different game speed options. They like to speed up the game when things are going well, and slow down the game when things are not going well. You need to focus more, micromanage more closely. I really only have one minor complaint with the overall UI and management mechanics, and that is I wish there was some form of camp-wide rainwater monitoring. Adding pipes and rainwater to buildings allows them to operate faster at the expense of corruption, and different buildings use different rainwater types. But it's pretty cumbersome to see which buildings use which types of rainwater, if they're actively using rainwater, things like that. It basically requires clicking on each building individually, which can get kind of annoying at the end of runs when you have so many buildings. Honestly, this is kind of a small point, and it mostly stands out because of how good the rest of the UI is, but I would still like to see this addressed in the future as updates continue. Everything I've talked about so far is in regard to that core gameplay of going on runs. But there is also that 4x like overworld mechanic that meshes with the progression system. Basically, before you start each run, you choose where you want to place each settlement. This choice determines what biome you're in addition to what resources will be available, what types of glade events you'll have, things like that. Additionally, there's sometimes additional modifiers that impact your run in possible negative or positive ways, like a modifier that prevents you from trading. There's also a second level of pseudo runs called cycles. Basically, when you place a couple cities away from your home base, every once in a while they all get destroyed and the cycle restarts. In some ways, it doesn't really matter what cycle you're on, but there are some implications for the progression system. Some recent updates, for example, have added more goals for cycles, like allowing you to unlock seals that affect future cycles. So while this overworld mechanic, these cycles are generally less complex than the core gameplay, it's definitely a secondary system, there's still a surprising amount of depth and planning involved. I do also want to note that the runs themselves are relatively long for roguelites, with my shortest successful runs being around an hour and a half, with some runs spanning multiple hours. I think this extended run length fits the gameplay quite well, but it does make it a less grab and play type of game compared to, say, Nuclear Throne or The Void Rains Upon Our Part, where you can start and finish a run in 10 to 20 minutes. The last thing I want to say in this section is while this game is technically in early access, it basically feels feature complete and honestly has for a while. I've really expected this game to enter 1.0 release for a while, but they keep updating it with great game updates, making it just better and better. I really don't see a reason to wait till 1.0 to play this game, but as always, there's some personal preference there. Now let's talk about the RNG and variety in Against the Storm. A lot of the variety in this game comes from the fact you can't always use the same buildings. As I mentioned, I think this just adds a lot of freshness and makes each run feel different. It's worth noting though that I never felt screwed over by not getting certain buildings, and there are a lot of counter RNG measures that reduce frustration. For one, your starting buildings can do all of the essential things, although oftentimes they're pretty inefficient. As I played more, my starting setup felt pretty formulaic. I would build a certain number of houses, 2 woodcutters, a basic workstation, things like that. But each run diverges pretty quickly from that point, so it never felt like StarCraft or something where you have a set opening you use every single time. Also, you can always choose between multiple different buildings, and you can unlock rerolls later on. The same principle also applies to cornerstones, those run modifying buffs you can get, as well as to the tasks and assignments you can get to complete for reputation. So I think Against the Storm does a good job of balancing that run-to-run variety without letting you get destroyed by bad RNG. Outside of that within run randomness, there are a couple pre-run sources of variety. For one, when you pick to start a settlement or run, there are a couple different options. There are 4 different biomes, as well as different modifiers you can run across. And each area has slightly different resources available on that run, and things like that. Finally, there are 2 different special game modes. One is a daily run game mode with special modifiers, and the other is a randomizer game mode. I'll be honest, I didn't really engage with either of these at all, but for those that like daily runs or that increase chaos, those are options for you as well. Now let's talk about progression and replayability. This game has a lot of strong cross-run vertical progression, or cross-run upgrades that make you more powerful in some way. Almost all the cross-run progression comes in the form of a giant skill tree that you can use to unlock things between runs. These upgrades range from unlocking new buildings for future runs, or new game modes, to unlocking some vertical progression, like giving you more buildings unlocked for free, allowing you to collect resources faster, and allowing you to start runs with more resources. To unlock things in the skill tree, you must spend 3 different resources. Get these resources by being successful on runs, with bread rewarded to you for every single run, while the other 2 resources are only rewarded if you complete runs with certain modifiers. You can see the rewards for each run before you actually start, so if you really want to get a certain unlock, you can aim for it like that. You also get XP for completing runs, and you must level up in order to buy certain tiers of unlocks. Realistically, I didn't find this XP and level up mechanic to be that limiting, and it mostly just prevents you from rushing down a single arm of that skill tree. There are also achievements you can complete, like winning a game in a certain number of years, or never letting that patience meter cross a certain threshold. These achievements usually reward you with XP, or those other currencies that I just mentioned, but there are sometimes some other unlocks, like new decorations you can use to spice up your settlements. Honestly, I overall like this progression system with the different upgrades, unlocks, as well as those different incentives for completing certain challenges, achievements, things like that. That said, it takes a really long time to fully unlock the skill tree, and I haven't done it fully myself yet. And there's also a lot of vertical progression. I wouldn't say this game ever felt grindy, mostly because you don't really need those unlocks to enjoy the base game, but you definitely are getting a lot more powerful as you unlock them. If you're somebody that's put off by that type of vertical progression, those cross-run buffs, that is something to be aware of. Outside of that, the game has 24 difficulty levels, which make it fun to master, then slowly climb those challenges. Similar to Ascension and Slay the Spire, higher difficulty levels add new modifiers, like one level requiring you to gain more reputation or to win, and another level making your villagers eat food faster. If you want a simple, more relaxing game, you can just do those lower difficulty settings and ignore some of those potentially frustrating mechanics like corruption, and ignore some of that micromanaging that the higher levels require. Higher difficulty levels also give you increased experience and progression currencies to aid with those unlocks. Now let's talk briefly about the narrative and world building in Against the Storm. This game is set up in a post-apocalyptic world where you create settlements for your queen. Every so often, storms come out and wipe out everything. Once the storm settles, you go out there, build more towns, get more resources for the queen, earn her favor, things like that. I liked this world and setting. I'm a sucker for a good post-apocalyptic world, but there also just really isn't much narrative outside of those basics. There's no main overarching story, there's no lore entries or journals, anything like that. But as I always say, that's how roguelites usually go. So what's my verdict on Against the Storm? Honestly, I just really love this game. It's one of my favorite roguelites, and it's still in early access. Against the Storm takes everything I love about city builders, their early settlement building, resource management, playing on different upgrades, and it adds great randomized roguelite elements to them. Crucially, because runs have a clear winning objective and failure or losing conditions, Against the Storm avoids what I hate most about traditional city builders and management sims. That is to say, it avoids that late game that gets really boring and tedious with a bunch of micromanagement. By the time the settlement starts to feel solved or completed, the run is either about to end or already over. If the idea of a roguelite city builder sounds appealing to you at all, definitely check out this game. I think the main reasons you wouldn't want to buy this game are because you hate micromanagement, but I will say again, you can avoid a lot of that micromanagement at lower difficulties. All the different things to control and modify do probably give this game a harder learning curve as well, but same comment, you don't have to engage with all these systems at the start or at all in order to have fun with the game. So really, if you're interested in this game at all, I would definitely recommend checking it out, giving it a try. Please like this video to help me out in the algorithm, and huge shout out to all of our channel members for helping support the channel. Thanks for watching.